A new poll by Redbridge Group has revealed where Labor is increasingly losing support ahead of the federal election and where the coalition is gaining ground. Peter Dutton's party now narrowly leads Anthony Albanese's on a two-party preferred basis. It is not a good sign for Labor, with the swing away from its Victorian seats at the weekend. Joining me now is Redbridge Group Director Simon Welsh. Simon, where to start on this? It's the outer suburban voters that Labor should be really concerned about. Is much of this at the moment Labor heartland?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Yeah, absolutely. So those once proud red wall type seats that Labor had called its own for so long are now really becoming highly contestable. So the result we saw on the weekend in the Werribee by-election down in Victoria was in many ways decades in the making. So this is voters feeling like they've been neglected, been taken for granted. We're a safe seat. We don't get looked after. We watch all the money go to, in this case, the other side of Melbourne. We've been hearing these stories now for years, coming out of focus groups and sort of coming out of the polling that we do. So in a sense, the Werribee result is no surprise. It's been cooking for a very long time, and we know that by-elections are the best vehicle for sending that message. When people vote a little bit differently in by-elections than they do in general elections, where you're voting for a government, a by-election is a real opportunity to send a direct message. But having said that, and laid that sort of groundwork and context of that particular election, the result certainly aligns with the broader trend. So in that recent poll that you're referring to, absolutely in the outer suburbs of Australia, when we did the survey nationally, the Labor primary in that poll was pretty close to what it was in the Werribee by-election. So even though Werribee had all that context around and all that worst case scenario type stuff, in the polling at the moment, it's actually in that kind of margin of error. It's around that result at a federal level. So there is definitely something going on with the Labor brand amongst those voters that were once considered safe Labor sort of areas. And there's a couple of things going on. Yes, it's about that neglect story. It's also about the changing nature of those outer suburbs. So we know those suburbs, they're growing quickly. They're growing with voters that are moving out there from other areas because they can't afford to live, sort of where they've been renting or live where they've grown up with mum and dad. So they're moving out to these areas, and they're coming with a different political perspective as well. I don't just mean in terms of their Liberal voters moving in. That's not necessarily the case, but they're coming with an expectation around services, around infrastructure and those sorts of things. And they're bringing those expectations with them, and they're not seeing them lived up to. And they see it as a political problem. They talk to us in the group. It is explicitly a political problem. The reason we have awful hospitals and public transport out here is because it is a safe Labor area, and we need to shake that up. So I think yes, Werribee has its own unique problems, but it's certainly part of a broader picture.
So let's look at the seats that this might put in frame then, that perhaps, when you just look at the margins, you'd think, they're not quite in play. Are we talking about seats like Aston? I mean, that is a marginal seat anyway, but that could go back to the Liberals there. What about outer suburban seats, particularly in Western Sydney? Does it put ones like Macquarie back in play? Now, that again is a marginal seat, but are there others with a 5 or 6% margin that Labor holds at the moment that could be in real trouble?
Yeah, I suspect it's going to be patchy, and I say that because I think the days of sort of uniform swings might be behind us in the new sort of political reality that we're seeing. Everything is so volatile. But certainly I would be watching absolutely any outer suburban seats in Victoria. So whether that's a McEwen in the north of Melbourne or Hawke coming around to the west, some of those seats and sort of the outer east, I'm thinking there of like a Holt or a Bruce. Those sorts of seats are going to be very volatile. Western Sydney, absolutely. Places like Werriwa, we've sort of got a close eye on that. But even some of those regional seats, so in and around the Hunter, if you take the Hunter broadly as a geographical region, not necessarily Hunter the electorate, that sort of area, we would be watching those areas as well. Again, once proud Labor areas, now feeling these pinches of neglect, and this narrative around this federal government that they haven't done enough on cost of living, and it's kind of interesting on that. Talking to people over this last week, that even sort of rusted on Labor voters are bemoaning the fact that Labor has done so poorly in communicating what it's done on cost of living. So they'll be sitting in focus groups and other people will say, oh, look, we feel like they've done nothing on cost of living. And they'll say, well, they've done the tax cuts. These are the rusted on voters will say they've done the tax cuts, they've done the prescriptions thing, they've done the childcare.
Yeah.
But what they haven't done is actually tell people about that and put it into a narrative and you sort of drum it into people that these are the things that have been done. So even the rusted on Labor voters aren't surprised that people are critiquing them on that score.
I would agree with that, because the jobs market is strong. The bottom hasn't fallen out of the unemployment rate. You've got, potentially a rate cut in an election campaign, and maybe even two, small chance, but maybe even two. And voters still see that from the focus group after focus group as a drop in the ocean. And they've also had the direct subsidies and rebates as well. So the sales job, you'd have to say, has been pretty poor.